My presentation is about how the new field of ancient DNA can give us a better understanding of ancient migrations and also the ancestral origins of modern-day populations. What is ancient DNA? Ancient DNA is DNA sequenced from the bones of ancient humans. When people die, their DNA doesn't evaporate. It survives in their bones for thousands and thousands of years after they die. Ancient DNA is DNA sequenced from those bones. It is a rising new field of study, and the first ancient human to have his DNA sequenced was in 2010. Now in 2019, there have been over 2,000 ancient humans who have had DNA sequenced from their bones. The study of ancient DNA has uncovered ancient migration events which no one knew about before and which no one had any way of discovering before. With knowledge of these migrations, we can gain a better understanding of the past as well as a better understanding of the ancestral origins of modern-day populations. In this presentation, I'll describe two migration events discovered by ancient DNA. First, the migration of early farmers out of the Middle East, and second, the migrations of Kyrgyz peoples out of the Russian steppes. Part 1. The migrations of Neolithic farmers out of the Middle East into Europe and into South Central Asia. Originally, people got all their food from hunting wild animals and gathering wild fruits and vegetables. This is called being a hunter-gatherer because you get your food by hunting and gathering. Originally, all humans were hunter-gatherers. This first began to change in 10,000 BC in the Middle East. In about 10,000 BC, people in the Middle East, specifically in the Levant, Iran, and Turkey, transformed from hunter-gatherers into farmers and herders. To be a farmer means you not only search for fruits and vegetables in the wild, but you primarily farm, aka plant your fruits and vegetables. To be a herder means you not only hunt wild animals for meat, but you also raise livestock, which you then butcher for meat. Ancient DNA has been sequenced from these early farmer herders in the Middle East, and what it shows is that they lived in three very distinct and unrelated populations, one in Iran, one in the Levant, and one in Turkey. They're more distinct and more unrelated from each other than any two populations in the Middle East today are. In 6000 BC, this Neolithic revolution spread into both Europe and South Asia. A question archaeologists have had is, did this knowledge spread because of the movement of people or only because of the movement of ideas? Ancient DNA from early farmers in Europe and South Asia give a very conclusive answer to this question. The answer is that in both cases, the emergence of the Neolithic revolution was due to a mass movement of people from the Middle East into those regions. The migration of Anatolian farmers into Europe. So like I said in the beginning, the early farmers who lived in the Middle East weren't all the same people. They lived in three distinct groups in three different regions. And the group who went into Europe lived specifically in Turkey, and they're called Anatolian farmers. Ancient DNA gives a lot of insight into the spread of Anatolian farmers into Europe. Between 6000 and 5000 BC, Anatolian farmers made settlements across this whole area in Europe highlighted on the map. It stretches from Greece in the east to Spain in the west. Between 5000 and 4000 BC, they assimilated, aka intermarried with the native hunter-gatherers in Europe. But farmers in Europe up until 3000 BC, so 3000 years after they first arrived from Anatolia, remained over 70% Anatolian in ancestry. In some parts of Europe, the farmers remained 90% Anatolian many thousands of years after their ancestors first arrived. This means the Anatolian farmers replaced many of the hunter-gatherers in the area of Europe highlighted on the map. However, Anatolian farmers did not make settlements in all of Europe, in particular in Russia, which plays an important role in the second part of this video. During the same time Anatolian farmers migrated into Europe, so 6000 to 5000 BC, a different group of Middle Eastern farmers from Iran, who were genetically distinct and very different from the Anatolian farmers, spread into Central and South Asia. This is sort of an undefined region of the world, so the Central Asia part refers to the Stan countries like Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan, and then the South Asia part basically only refers to India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. In the Central Asia part, the Iranian farmers replaced most of the hunter-gatherer gene pool like the Anatolian farmers did in much of Europe, but in India it was a very different story. In India, aka South Asia. In South Asia, the early farmers acquired a large percentage of native hunter-gatherer ancestry, which ranged from 60 to 30%, but overall, in South Central Asia, like in Europe, the farmers from the Middle East replaced a very large degree of the native hunter-gatherer gene pool. The legacy of early farmers in modern-day populations. Those early farmers from Iran and Anatolia, they have many descendants today. Their migrations, which occurred way back 7,000 years ago, left a legacy which is still very strong today. To prove this, I'm going to put up on 2 maps which show the percentages of ancestry from each of them in modern day populations. This first map is the percentages of Iran farmer ancestry in modern populations. And you can see that it's pretty common in the Middle East, around 20 to 30%. It's most common in southern Iran at 50%. And importantly, it's just as common or frequent in South Asia, in India, Pakistan, Afghanistan at about 40% as it is in Iran. So the migration of early farmers from Iran into South Central Asia 7,000 years ago still explains around 40% of the ancestry of people living there today. And this second map shows the percentages of Anatolian farmer ancestry in modern populations. And you can see it's important in the Middle East, in North Africa, and in Europe, where almost all populations in those 3 regions derive about at least 25% of their ancestry from Anatolian farmers. But most importantly, Anatolian farmer ancestry is most frequent in Southern Europe at about 50 to 60%. So what this means is that people in Southern Europe today still derive over 50% of their ancestry from those early Anatolian farmers who migrated there about 7,000 years ago. So in conclusion, ancient DNA has helped understand how the Neolithic Revolution expanded out of the Middle East into Europe and South Central Asia. It conclusively shows that it spread with the mass movement of people. Mass movements which replaced much of the gene pool of the native hunter-gatherers in both regions. Lastly, these Neolithic migrations out of the Middle East from Anatolia into Europe and from Iran into South Central Asia are an important part of the ancestral origins of modern populations in both regions. The migrations of the Kyrgyz people out of the Russian steppes and the origins of the Indo-European languages. What are Indo-European languages? It is a language family. I show on a map where Indo-European languages are spoken. So basically all the languages in Europe from English to Spanish to Russian and many more belong to this language family. This language family also exists in some parts of Asia. So it includes the most languages in India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Armenia, and Tajikistan. Researchers have been trying to understand the origins of this language family since the 1800s. Beginning in the 1960s, most have agreed that the Indo-European language family originated in and was spread by the Kyrgyz peoples. The Kyrgyz peoples lived in southern Russia and Ukraine in 4000 to 3000 BC. They were originally only known through archaeology, but in recent years, researchers have sequenced DNA from the bones of many Kyrgyz peoples. What their DNA shows is they migrated in huge numbers throughout Europe and Asia, and they have many descendants today. They migrated into all the places where the Indo-European languages exist today. So ancient DNA supports the idea which experts have had for decades now, which is that the Kyrgyz peoples are the source of the Indo-European languages. This is a map showing the expansion of the Kyrgyz peoples out of the Russian steppes. 4000 BC, 2800 BC, 2400 BC, 1800 BC. Now compare this map to the map of where the Indo-European languages exist. There's a clear correlation. The places where the Kyrgyz people migrated almost match perfectly to where these languages exist. Now here's a map showing the percentages of ancestry from the Kyrgyz peoples in modern day populations. Kyrgyz ancestry exists in all the modern day populations in Europe, Central Asia, South Asia, Iran, Turkey, as well as Western Siberia and the southern part of Siberia. All populations in these regions have at least 10% Kyrgyz ancestry, and this shows that the Kyrgyz peoples have many descendants today, many more descendants than most of their contemporaries in 4000 BC left behind. Kyrgyz ancestry is highest in people in Northern Europe at about 50%. Populations in Southern Europe have between 20 and 30% Kyrgyz ancestry. Overall, the Kyrgyz people are an important ancestor of almost all modern-day Europeans who happen to almost all speak the Indo-European languages. So it makes sense that those languages come from the Kyrgyz peoples. In Asia, Kyrgyz ancestry is highest in Afghanistan, Tajikistan, and in tiny ethnic groups in northern Pakistan at about 20 to 30%. It is highest in Tajikistan at about 35%. And in India, Iran, Turkey, and in some parts of the Middle East, populations have between 10 to 15% Kyrgyz ancestry. In conclusion, the two examples in this video, the migrations of early farmers out of the Middle East and the migrations of the Kyrgyz peoples, demonstrate how effective ancient DNA is as a tool at understanding the movements of people in the past, how those movements spread ideas and languages, and at understanding the ancestral origins of modern-day populations.